The rain hammered against my kitchen window like 1,000 angry fists. I stood at the sink, my hands deep in soapy water, scrubbing the remnants of dinner from ceramic plates that had seen better days. The steam rose around my face, and for a moment, I let myself disappear into the mundane rhythm of the task. From the living room, I could hear my 2 grandchildren giggling at some cartoon, their voices pure and innocent, untouched by the cruelty this world had shown their mother. Thank you for watching Granny's narrative. Please subscribe and tell us where you are watching from in the comment. The doorbell rang. Not a friendly ring, not the kind that brings good news or unexpected visitors bearing gifts. This was sharp, demanding, the kind of ring that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I wiped my hands slowly on my apron, each movement deliberate, buying myself seconds I knew I would need. My heart was already racing, that maternal instinct that warns you when danger approaches your family. I walked to the door, my feet heavy on the worn wooden floorboards that creaked with each step. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes, 3 of them, tall and imposing against the backdrop of the storm. I took a breath deep enough to steady my nerves and opened the door. There they stood. My former son-in-law Marcus. His parents Richard and Patricia Blackwood. Marcus wore an expensive suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he had lost weight from stress. His hair was slicked back but disheveled from the rain, droplets running down his pale cheeks. He could not meet my eyes. His father Richard stood like a general inspecting enemy territory, broad-shouldered. His face carved from stone, wearing authority like a second skin. Patricia stood beside him with that practiced smile she had perfected over decades of high society gatherings. Her lips painted crimson, her eyes calculating and cold. In her manicured hands, she clutched an enormous gift basket wrapped in gold cellophane, filled with imported wines and exotic fruits that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Good evening, Mrs. Henderson," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness like honey laced with poison. "The weather is simply dreadful, and as we were in the neighborhood, we thought it would be lovely to drop by and say hello." She thrust the basket toward me as if it were a peace treaty, as if expensive items could buy back what they had destroyed. "We have missed the boy terribly," she continued, each word carefully chosen, deliberately emphasized. "Children need both parents, do they not? A proper family unit is so important for development." I stared at the basket, then at her eyes. Those eyes that had once looked at my pregnant daughter with such disgust, that had watched as she was thrown out into the rain without a shred of compassion. I did not take the basket. Instead, I stepped back and opened the door wider, my face calm though my insides churned like a storm-tossed sea. "Please come in," I said neutrally, as if they were ordinary visitors and not the people who had shattered my daughter's heart into a million pieces. "It is far too wet to stand outside." They entered my modest home, their shoes clicking on the old floor, their eyes sweeping the space with barely concealed judgment. I could see Patricia taking in the mismatched furniture, the toys scattered across the faded rug, the simple curtains I had sewn myself years ago. Her expression said everything. How could their precious grandson possibly be raised in such humble conditions? Richard sat rigidly on my worn sofa, his spine never touching the backrest, as if relaxing would somehow diminish his authority. Marcus remained standing, his gaze fixed on the floorboards as if they held the secrets to redemption he so desperately sought. I went to the kitchen and prepared 3 cups of tea, my hands trembling slightly as I poured the hot liquid. I arranged them on a tray with precision, using the time to gather my thoughts and steel myself for whatever manipulation was about to unfold. When I returned to the living room, Patricia had already launched into her rehearsed performance. "We know we made some regrettable decisions," she began, her voice saccharine and calculated. "These past 3 years have been absolute torture for us, Mrs. Henderson. Not a single night has passed when we have not thought about our grandson." She placed deliberate emphasis on the word grandson, as if staking a claim to property she believed belonged to her. "We simply want to make amends, to be part of his life, to give him the advantages he deserves." I knew they had heard the rumors. Word travels fast in small communities, and somehow they had discovered that my daughter had given birth not to one child but to two. But they did not know the full truth, and I was not about to hand them that information on a silver platter. I smiled slightly, a smile that held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of someone who holds all the cards in a game the opponent does not even know they are playing. Without responding to Patricia's manipulative words, I turned toward the hallway and called out loudly enough for my daughter to hear. "Sarah, bring the girl out to meet her grandparents." There was a deliberate firmness in my voice, a battle cry disguised as a simple request. I heard movement from the bedroom, and then the door opened. Sarah emerged, her face composed but her eyes blazing with quiet determination. She had been through hell and come out the other side, and fear no longer had a hold on her. In her arms she carried little Emma, my granddaughter, dressed in soft pink pajamas decorated with tiny rabbits. The child's hair was light brown with natural waves, just like Marcus when he was young, but her dark eyes were pure Sarah, bright and intelligent and full of life. Emma yawned, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck, completely unaware of the tension that filled the room like smoke. The three Blackwoods froze as if someone had pressed pause on their existence. Patricia's smile cracked and fell from her face like a mask hitting the floor. Marcus jerked his head up, his eyes widening in shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, unable to form words. Even Richard, always so controlled and composed, could not hide his confusion. His voice came out broken and uncertain, nothing like the commanding tone he usually employed. "What is this? What are you saying? This is a girl." I stood there in silence, letting them marinate in their own assumptions, letting them feel the weight of their prejudice and their cruelty. I let them see exactly what they had thrown away 3 years ago when they decided that my daughter was worthless because she carried a female child in her womb. 3 years ago, I had believed my daughter's life was finally secure when she married into the Blackwood family. I remembered standing in their magnificent garden on that perfect spring day, watching Sarah walk down an aisle lined with white roses and orchids, the air heavy with their perfume. Lights had been strung through the trees like captured stars, and everything looked like a scene from a fairy tale. I had worn my best dress, the navy blue one I saved for special occasions, and held my daughter's hand as we walked together toward the altar where Marcus waited in his tailored tuxedo. I had leaned close to Sarah and whispered with tears in my eyes, "Be so very happy, my darling. You deserve all the joy in the world." Marcus had looked at me that day with such sincerity in his eyes, had taken my daughter's hand with what seemed like genuine love and commitment. I had believed him. I had trusted that he would protect my daughter the way her father would have if he had still been alive. The first months after the wedding seemed perfect. Marcus would drive Sarah to visit me every weekend in his expensive car, bringing bags filled with pastries from exclusive bakeries, fresh fruit imported from distant countries, expensive bottles of wine he claimed were vintages from famous vineyards. He would sit in my small kitchen and talk enthusiastically about his family's real estate empire, about business trips to exotic locations, about the life he was building with Sarah. "Do not worry, Mother," he would say with confidence and warmth in his voice. "Sarah is my queen now. I will give her everything she could ever want or need." I would watch my daughter during those visits, see her smiling and radiant, her cheeks flushed with happiness, her eyes bright with hope for the future. After years of struggling in our small house after her father died, after years of making ends meet and sacrificing so she could have opportunities, I thought life was finally rewarding her. I thought all the hardship was behind us and only good things lay ahead. Sometimes Sarah would mention her mother-in-law Patricia with a hint of hesitation in her voice. "She is very particular about things, Mom," Sarah would say carefully, trying not to worry me. "She keeps talking about me giving the family a son, about continuing the Blackwood name and legacy. She says it is important for the business, for the family reputation." I had felt a cold chill run down my spine when Sarah said those things, but I pushed the unease away. I told myself it was just the way wealthy families thought, that they had different priorities and traditions, that Sarah would be loved regardless of what child she bore. Then Sarah called to tell me she was pregnant, and my world filled with light. I had been sitting on my front porch, drinking tea and watching the sunset when my phone rang. Marcus's voice came through excited and proud. "Mother, Sarah is going to have a baby. We are going to be parents." I had cried tears of pure joy, imagining the moment I would hold my grandchild, imagining a baby's laughter filling this old house with new life and hope. The Blackwoods threw an elaborate party to celebrate the pregnancy. They invited me to their mansion, and I felt like I had stepped into another world. The house was lit up like a palace. Servants moved efficiently through crowds of guests in expensive clothes, and the dining table was covered with dishes I had never seen in my entire life. Patricia stood at the center of it all, raising her crystal wine glass high and declaring loudly, "This child will be the pride and future of the Blackwood family empire." I sat in a corner feeling completely out of place among such wealth and extravagance, but my heart was warm with happiness for my daughter. That happiness shattered like glass 3 months later. I was sweeping my front porch when my phone rang. Sarah's voice came through trembling and thin, completely different from her usual cheerful tone. "Mom," she said, barely more than a whisper, her words on the verge of breaking. "I just came from the doctor. They did an ultrasound. The baby is a girl." Before I could respond, before I could tell her that a daughter was just as precious and wonderful as a son, I heard a loud crash through the phone. Then Patricia's voice came through sharp and venomous, not realizing I could hear every word. "A girl. How utterly useless. The Blackwood family does not need some worthless daughter taking up space and resources. We need an heir, not a burden." That word, worthless, struck me like a physical blow to the chest. I tried calling Sarah back immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. The call went to voicemail. I tried Marcus's number. No answer. I called again and again, dozens of times, but no one picked up. A terrible fear gripped my heart, squeezing tighter with each unanswered ring. 1 week later at midnight my phone finally rang again. I lunged for it in the darkness, my heart pounding. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. "Mom, please help me." Her voice came through broken by sobs and the sound of wind and rain. "They threw me out of the house. I am at the gate. Please come." I did not think. I did not hesitate. I grabbed my coat and ran to my old truck, starting the engine with trembling hands. The rain was falling in sheets, so heavy I could barely see the road ahead, but I drove faster than I had ever driven in my life. Nothing else mattered except getting to my daughter. When I arrived at the Blackwood mansion, the scene before me will haunt me until my dying day. Sarah was on her knees in front of the locked iron gates, her pregnant belly swollen and obvious beneath her soaked clothing. The rain had plastered her hair to her face and neck. Her body shook violently from cold and shock. Her suitcase had been thrown onto the wet pavement, broken open, and the baby clothes I had lovingly knitted for my grandchild were scattered in muddy puddles, trampled and ruined. I looked up at the mansion and saw Marcus standing in a second-floor window. For just a moment our eyes met. Then he quickly pulled the curtain closed and disappeared, not even having the courage or decency to face what he had done. I ran through the rain and wrapped my arms around Sarah. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." "Mom is here," I whispered, my voice choked with fury and heartbreak. I pulled off my coat and draped it over her shaking shoulders, trying to shield her from the elements and from the cruelty of the world. Sarah looked up at me, her face deathly pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I failed," she sobbed. I did not let her finish that sentence. I helped her to her feet, supporting her weight, and slowly guided her to the truck. I went back and gathered every piece of baby clothing from the mud, every tiny sock and sweater, even though they were ruined, because they represented love and hope, and I refused to let the Blackwoods destroy those things. I held back my tears because Sarah needed me to be strong. She needed to see that we would survive this nightmare. As I helped Sarah into the truck, I made a silent vow that echoed through my entire being. From this moment forward, no one will ever hurt my daughter again. I will protect her and this baby with everything I have. No one will break us. The next morning after bringing Sarah home, I cleaned out her old childhood bedroom at the end of the hallway. I opened the curtains to let sunlight stream in, dusted every surface, and carefully took down all the wedding photos Sarah had hung on the walls with such hope and innocence. She helped me in heavy silence, folding blankets and organizing her few belongings with slow mechanical movements, as if putting away her broken dreams piece by piece. The first few nights were terrible. I would wake up in the darkness to the sound of Sarah crying in the next room. She tried to muffle the sound, tried to hide her pain from me, but our small house carried every whisper and sob. One night I could not bear it any longer. I gently pushed open her door and found her curled into a ball on the bed, her arms wrapped around her pregnant belly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, baby. I am so sorry you have to suffer because of me," she was murmuring to her unborn child. I went to her and pulled her into my arms, holding her tight while she cried. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Sarah," I said firmly. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, and this baby is blessed to have you as a mother." I began cooking all the nutritious meals I could remember, the same dishes my mother had made for me when I was pregnant with Sarah. Rich bone broths, protein-filled stews, fresh vegetables, and vitamin-packed smoothies. "You must eat for yourself and for the baby," I would say each time I placed a full plate in front of her. Sarah would nod and pick up her fork, but her eyes remained distant and empty, as if her spirit had left her body. Every afternoon I made Sarah go for walks with me through the neighborhood. I hoped the fresh air and exercise would help her heal, would bring some color back to her pale cheeks. But the stares from neighbors, the whispered conversations that stopped when we approached, the pitying and judgmental looks made Sarah walk with her head down, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. "Mrs. Henderson, did your daughter get abandoned by her husband?" one neighbor asked me bluntly at the grocery store, loud enough for others to hear. I smiled coldly and replied, "My family's business is my own, thank you." But inside my heart ached. I was not only suffering for what Sarah was enduring, but for how cruel and thoughtless people could be. A week after Sarah moved back home, Marcus's lawyer called. His voice was smooth and professional, coldly polite as he requested a meeting to finalize divorce proceedings. I looked at Sarah, waiting for her decision. She nodded, her expression tired but resolute. "Let us go and be done with this, Mom," she said quietly. We met them at a small coffee shop, not the fancy law office I had expected. The space was cramped with old wooden tables, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air, dim lighting that made everything feel depressing and final. Marcus arrived with his lawyer, and he did not look at Sarah once. He sat across from us as if we were strangers, as if the years of marriage and love had never existed. He pulled out a check and slid it across the table toward Sarah. The amount was staggering, more money than I would see in 5 years. "Take this and disappear from our lives forever," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. I watched my daughter carefully, waiting to see what she would do. Sarah looked at the check for a long moment, then looked up and met Marcus's eyes directly. For the first time since this nightmare began, her gaze did not waver. She did not look away or show any fear. "I do not want your blood money," she said clearly and firmly. She pushed the check back across the table with a decisive motion that felt like closing a door forever. Marcus smiled with contempt, a cruel expression that made him look like a stranger. He signed the divorce papers with harsh strokes, as if trying to erase Sarah from existence with each signature. Before he stood to leave, he looked at Sarah with ice in his eyes and said, "I do not have a child. That baby never existed and never will exist to me." Those words were meant to be the final blow, to crush any remaining hope Sarah might have held onto. I squeezed her hand under the table, feeling her fingers go cold. When we left the coffee shop, I held her close and whispered, "He has no idea what he just gave up. That child will be loved beyond measure, and he will never know that blessing." Months passed slowly. Sarah's belly grew round and heavy. We prepared a small nursery in the corner of her room with second-hand furniture I had repainted and soft blankets I had sewn late at night. On a stormy night when the wind howled and rain lashed against the windows, Sarah suddenly cried out in pain, clutching her stomach. "Mom, something is wrong." It hurts so much, she gasped, her face going white as chalk. I saw that her water had broken, a full month before the due date. I called for an ambulance immediately, but the dispatcher told me the storm had knocked down trees and power lines, blocking roads throughout the area. There was no time to wait. I helped Sarah to my truck and drove through the flooded streets, water rising halfway up the tires, visibility almost zero. I was terrified, but I pushed the fear down deep. My daughter needed me to be brave. The community health center was small and poorly equipped. There was only one elderly doctor with completely white hair and 2 young nurses who looked worried when they saw Sarah's condition. The delivery room was bare and clinical, smelling strongly of disinfectant. Sarah writhed in agony, her hand crushing mine, her screams echoing off the walls. I stayed beside her through every contraction, whispering encouragement. "You can do this, my darling. I'm right here. I will not leave you." After what felt like an eternity, a baby's cry filled the room, strong and clear. One of the nurses held up the infant and announced with relief, "It is a healthy baby girl." I felt tears stream down my face as I looked at my beautiful granddaughter. Sarah, exhausted and drenched in sweat, managed a weak smile. I took her hand and squeezed it, feeling overwhelming love and gratitude. But then the doctor frowned. He placed his stethoscope on Sarah's belly again, his expression puzzled. He looked up with surprise and said urgently, "Wait. There is another baby. We are not finished." The room went silent. I stood frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. 15 minutes later, another cry rang out, even stronger than the first. The doctor lifted the second baby and his voice shook as he said, "My God. It is a boy. She has given birth to twins. Boy and a girl." I held both of my grandchildren, overwhelmed by a swirl of emotions. Joy and relief and heartbreak all mixed together. I looked at Sarah, who was smiling despite her exhaustion, and I knew we had survived something terrible and come out the other side. When Sarah and the babies were stable, I went back to the private clinic where Sarah had received her prenatal care. I asked to speak with the doctor who had performed the early ultrasounds. He was a middle-aged man who seemed nervous when I questioned him. He explained that the pregnancy was in early stages, that sometimes one baby can be hidden behind the other, making it appear that only one child is present. His explanation felt rehearsed and incomplete, but I did not press him. Instead, I made a decision that would shape our lives for years to come. Marcus, the boy, would remain our secret. The world that had rejected a baby simply because she was female did not deserve to know about my grandson. People like the Blackwoods had proven they cared nothing about children, only about heirs and family legacy and maintaining power. I looked at Sarah and at my 2 beautiful grandchildren, and I promised myself we would raise them with love and truth, far away from the poison of that family. Years passed quietly. Sarah found work as an accountant at a small local bookstore, bringing in modest income and slowly rebuilding her confidence. Emma and Marcus grew into bright, happy children, their laughter filling our home with joy. I thought we were free of the Blackwoods forever. I thought they had moved on and forgotten about us. I was wrong. That rainy afternoon when the doorbell rang and I found the 3 Blackwoods standing on my porch, I realized they had never stopped watching us. Somehow they had heard rumors about the twins, and now they had come to claim what they believed belonged to them. After Sarah brought Emma into the living room, the 3 Blackwoods sat frozen on my sofa like statues carved from ice. Emma yawned adorably in her pink bunny pajamas, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists, completely unaware of the cold stares directed at her. Patricia was the first to break the heavy silence. She forced a crooked smile, her red lips trembling as she tried to maintain her facade of perfection. "Oh, a girl," she said with fake enthusiasm that fooled no one. "How lovely." But her eyes did not linger on Emma. They darted toward the back of the house where cartoon sounds could still be heard from the television. She looked directly at me, her voice sweet but sharp as a knife. "But we heard Sarah had twins, Mrs. Henderson. Where is the boy?" I felt my heart clench, but I kept my face calm. I slowly set down my teacup, taking my time, hiding the rage burning inside me. Twins. I frowned as if confused. Who told you such a thing? There must be some misunderstanding. I looked at Sarah holding Emma, and with a gentle voice full of tenderness I said, "My daughter only has this one precious girl. Is that not right, sweetheart?" I emphasized the word one, making it crystal clear that Emma was all they needed to know about. Sarah understood immediately. She held Emma tighter and nodded without speaking, her gaze cold as ice fixed on the three people who had destroyed her life. Marcus's patience seemed to be evaporating. He jumped to his feet and began pacing back and forth across my small living room. His expensive leather shoes clicked loudly on the wooden floor. "Damn it," he muttered in frustration. "We came all this way for nothing." He stopped and looked at me, then at Sarah with anger and disappointment burning in his eyes. Richard, always so proper and controlled, finally lost his composure. He slammed his hand down on my coffee table. The sound was sharp enough to make Emma flinch and bury her face against Sarah's chest. "We did not drive through this storm to see some random girl," he growled, spitting the word girl like it was poison. "Where is our grandson, Mrs. Henderson?" His question sounded like a demand, as if he had every right to march into my home and claim a child they had thrown away 3 years ago. His words ignited my anger, but I quickly transformed it into cold contempt. I looked at each of them slowly. At Patricia with her fake smile and designer clothes. At Richard with his arrogant posture and sense of entitlement. At Marcus, a coward who could not face the consequences of his actions. They had not come seeking forgiveness. They had not come out of love. They had come for Marcus, for their heir, for what they considered their property. Emma, my precious granddaughter, simply did not exist in their eyes. I stood up and walked directly to the front door, throwing it wide open. Cold air and rain rushed in, bringing the smell of wet earth and coming thunder. I turned to face them and said in a calm but absolutely firm voice, "If you came here only looking for your legitimate grandson, I am sorry to inform you that you have the wrong house. Here there are only children who are truly loved." I gestured toward the open door and added without hesitation, "You may leave now." Patricia's face turned red with fury. She jumped to her feet, pointed a trembling finger at me, and shouted, "You! How dare you speak to us this way?" But I did not move or flinch. I looked her straight in the eyes and answered with a serene voice, "I dare because this is my home, and I will not welcome people who treat their own grandchildren like merchandise to be evaluated and discarded." My words fell like a steel wall between us. I saw confusion flash across Patricia's face, helplessness in Richard's rigid posture. Marcus just stood there staring at Sarah and Emma with an expression I could not quite read. For a brief moment, I thought I saw regret flicker in his eyes, as if he suddenly remembered what he had lost. But that light was quickly extinguished when his father shot him a cold warning glare. They left with their heads lowered, leaving behind the unopened gift basket on my table. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a final statement of dismissal. Sarah stood behind me holding Emma, her shoulders shaking. I turned and wrapped both of them in my arms, feeling the warmth of Emma's small body and Sarah's racing heartbeat. "Mom," Sarah murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Do not be afraid, my darling," I said firmly, though I was still trembling inside. "I will never let them hurt you or the children again. Never." The weeks following the Blackwoods' visit passed in false calm. My small house remained filled with Emma and Marcus's laughter and play, but I could not shake a deep sense of unease. I became hyper-vigilant. I no longer let the children play outside unsupervised. Every time I took them to the yard, I would scan the street, checking for unfamiliar cars or watching figures. One afternoon, my kind neighbor Carol knocked on the door with a plate of fresh banana bread. She sat down for tea and mentioned casually, "There has been a strange man hanging around the neighborhood lately, Mrs. Henderson. He was asking questions about your house." Her words were spoken with innocent curiosity, but they pierced me like needles. "What kind of questions?" I asked, trying to sound casual though my hands gripped my teacup tightly. Carol shrugged. "He asked where exactly you lived, how many people live here, and specifically about the children. I did not tell him anything important, just that he should mind his own business. I smiled gratefully at Carol, but when she left, I sat frozen, feeling as if invisible hands were tightening around my throat. I knew immediately that the Blackwoods had not given up. They had somehow discovered Marcus's existence, and they would not stop until they got what they wanted. That night after dinner, as Sarah and I were cleaning up while Emma and Marcus played with building blocks in their room, the doorbell rang. The sharp metallic sound cut through the peaceful evening like a knife. Sarah looked at me with worry in her eyes, then instinctively picked up Emma, holding her protectively. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it prepared for battle. Standing under the porch light were Marcus and his father Richard. There was no shiny luxury car this time, just an ordinary sedan, as if they had deliberately chosen something humble to appear less threatening. Marcus stood at the door wearing a simple gray sweater instead of his usual expensive suits, but I immediately recognized that the look of repentance on his face was carefully rehearsed and completely false. He lowered his head, stared at the ground, and said in a trembling voice, "Mother, please forgive us for last time. We were shocked and overwhelmed. We were not thinking clearly. We are so tired and we just want to make things right." His words sounded like lines from a script, memorized but completely lacking sincerity. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway without inviting them inside. "Being tired is not an excuse for denying your own blood," I replied in a cold, emotionless voice. Richard stepped forward, his tall, imposing figure seeming to loom over me. His tone was controlled but carried an unmistakable threat. "We know everything, Mrs. Henderson. We know Sarah had twins, a boy and a girl. Our people saw them at the park last week." His words shattered the protective wall I had built around my family. I felt blood rush to my head, but I forced myself to remain calm and not show that his revelation affected me. I looked him straight in the eye without a trace of fear. "Your people?" I asked with heavy sarcasm. "So you have been spying on us as if we were criminals? What kind of people do that to their own family?" Marcus finally looked up, his eyes finding Sarah, who stood behind me holding Emma. "Sarah, I am begging you," he said in what was supposed to sound like a pleading voice. "Let me see my son. I want to be his father. I want to make up for my mistakes." He emphasized the word son as if Emma, the granddaughter Sarah was holding at that very moment, did not exist at all. His words made me lose all remaining control. I let out a dry, bitter laugh that echoed in the tense silence. "Be a father," I said in a sharp, cutting tone. "You gave up that right 3 years ago when you let my daughter kneel in the rain and cold. When you said the baby she was carrying never existed for you." I took a step forward, pronouncing each word with deliberate firmness. "If you genuinely cared about your children, here is your daughter and your granddaughter right in front of you. But you treated them like garbage. You do not deserve to see either of my grandchildren ever again." My words created an impenetrable steel barrier between us. I saw Marcus's confidence waver, but Richard's face remained hardened like a man who refuses to accept defeat. At that precise moment, small footsteps echoed from inside the house. Marcus, curious like any innocent child, ran out from the bedroom and hid behind my legs, peeking at the strangers with his wide eyes. "Grandma, who are these people?" he asked with pure innocence, not understanding anything, but his simple question pierced my heart like a dagger. Marcus and Richard's eyes locked onto the boy, filled with unmistakable desire and greed. I could see exactly what they wanted, not out of love or family connection, but for what they called their heir. Gently, I pushed little Marcus back toward the bedroom and closed the door, shielding him from those predatory stares. "Go play with your sister, sweetheart," I said in a sweet voice, trying to keep him from sensing the danger in the air. Richard's polite mask finally cracked and fell away. He stepped closer, his voice becoming a clear threat. "Do not think you can act this way. You are preventing us from seeing our rightful grandson. We will take you to court. We will sue for custody." Marcus intervened, his tone becoming firmer as if he had finally found courage through his father's intimidation. The law will be on our side. The boy needs his father. He needs a better future than this miserable place can provide. The word miserable was like a slap across my face. I looked around my small home where I had raised Sarah and protected my grandchildren with everything I had. It might not be luxurious or impressive, but it was overflowing with genuine love and safety, and this man who had abandoned his own blood dared to call it miserable. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes without even a hint of fear. "Go ahead and do it," I said in a calm but ice-cold voice. "Take us to court. I am not afraid of liars and manipulators. I am ready to face you anywhere, anytime." I took a step back, placed my hand on the doorknob, and slammed the door shut in their faces. The sharp click of the lock resonated like a firm declaration of war. They had no place in our lives, and I would fight with everything I had to keep them out. Just 1 week after the Blackwoods left my house with faces full of rage and humiliation, a postal worker appeared at my door. He handed me a thick official envelope with the red seal of the city family court. I stood there with the envelope in my trembling hands, my heart beating so fast I thought it would burst through my chest. I knew immediately this was what I had been dreading. I went inside and opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Every line of the legal document felt like a physical blow. The Blackwoods were demanding official recognition of paternity between Marcus Blackwood and Marcus Henderson, and they were claiming full legal custody of the boy. They had even already assigned him their last name in the documents, as if he were an object they could simply claim ownership of. Sarah sat beside me and read the lawsuit with trembling hands, silent tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking apart. "What are we going to do?" I hugged her tightly and tried to project strength I did not fully feel. "Do not be afraid, Sarah. The truth is on our side. Justice will prevail." But inside I was terrified too, not of losing in court but because I knew this battle would drag my family through hell again. The next morning when I opened the region's largest newspaper, a shocking headline jumped out at me like an attack. "Blackwood family tragedy. Selfish grandmother prevents them from seeing legitimate grandson." The article was accompanied by a carefully staged photograph. Marcus, looking thin and devastated, sat between his elderly parents. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with an expensive silk handkerchief. The article's content was a web of lies. They claimed they had been cruelly deceived about Marcus's existence, that they had tried repeatedly to reconcile and be part of the children's lives, but that Sarah and I had blocked them out of spite and greed. Even worse, they insinuated that we were holding the boy hostage to extort money from their wealthy family. I read those poisonous words, crumpling the newspaper in my fists, rage washing over me quickly replaced by deep sadness. They were not only trying to take Marcus from us, they were also attempting to destroy our honor and reputation, to paint us as greedy villains in the public eye. The consequences of that article came swiftly and painfully. That same morning I took Emma and Marcus to the market as usual. The children held my hands, chattering excitedly about their upcoming school project, but I immediately noticed the change in atmosphere around us. The vegetable seller who usually greeted me with a warm smile now simply weighed my produce in cold silence, avoiding eye contact. A nearby fruit vendor muttered to her customer just loud enough for me to hear, "You see those people? They are keeping that poor boy away from his real family just to get money from rich folks." Every word felt like needles stabbing into my heart. I squeezed Emma and Marcus's hands tighter and forced a bright smile so they would not notice anything wrong, though inside my soul felt crushed under the weight of judgment. On the way home, Marcus asked with innocent confusion, "Grandma, why did the vegetable lady not give me a sticker today? She always gives me a sticker." I stroked his soft hair and replied with a choked voice, "She must have run out today, sweetheart. I will buy you some stickers tomorrow, okay?" But deep down I knew it was not about stickers. It was about how quickly people believed lies when they were printed in newspapers. The monthly book club meeting that had once been my sanctuary became unbearable. The president who used to invite me for tea and conversation suddenly changed the discussion topic to the importance of family lineage and bloodlines. My old friends avoided my gaze, whispering among themselves whenever I walked past. Some even got up and moved to different seats when I sat down. I tried to stay for the entire meeting to show I was not ashamed, but the hostile atmosphere became suffocating. I gathered my things halfway through and left quietly, feeling more alone than I had felt in years. Outside, the afternoon sunlight fell across my shoulders, but I felt only darkness and isolation. The betrayal of people I had considered friends tore at my soul. I wondered if truth even mattered anymore, or if lies would always win when they were told loudly enough by powerful people. But I could not just sit back and wait. I could not let the Blackwoods continue spinning their web of deception unchallenged. I went to see Mr. Thompson, an old friend of my late husband who had worked as an attorney for over 40 years. Mr. Thompson was retired now, living in a small cottage with a garden full of bright yellow sunflowers, but his reputation as a fair and brilliant lawyer still echoed throughout our town. I sat in his modest living room and told him everything, from the night Sarah was thrown out of the Blackwood mansion to the moment they appeared at my door demanding to see Marcus. When I finished speaking, he nodded slowly with a serious but compassionate expression. "Mrs. Henderson, I will take your case," he said firmly. "Not because of money, but because this is about basic human decency and justice. Your family deserves to be protected from these people." His words were like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and for the first time in days, I felt genuine hope that we were not completely alone in this fight. We immediately began gathering evidence to build our case. I returned home and retrieved an old wooden box I kept in my bedroom closet, where I stored precious family documents and memories. Inside was the divorce decree with Marcus Blackwood's signature clearly visible, where he had voluntarily and explicitly waived all rights and responsibilities for the unborn child Sarah was carrying. I also found a crumpled yellowed piece of paper that Marcus had thrown at Sarah along with that blood money check, where he had written in angry, harsh letters, "I want nothing to do with you or that worthless baby. You are both dead to me." Every time I read those cruel words, I felt deep aching pain for what my daughter had endured, but I also knew this letter was our most powerful weapon. It proved beyond any doubt that Marcus had willingly and deliberately abandoned his child. In addition, I carefully prepared a detailed folder of documents showing that for 3 long years, Sarah and I had covered every single expense related to raising both children. Formula diapers, doctor visits, clothing, food, daycare, medications, everything. Not one single dollar had come from the Blackwood family. Every receipt, every bill, every bank statement was proof of our dedication and their complete abandonment. Meanwhile, the Blackwood family lawyer appeared constantly in newspapers and on local television, giving dramatic interviews designed to win public sympathy. He spoke with practiced sorrow about the pain of a separated family, about grandparents suffering from being denied access to their beloved grandson, about a father desperate to fulfill his responsibilities. Every word was a layer of false paint carefully applied to hide their selfishness, greed, and cruelty. Sarah and I made the difficult decision to remain completely silent to the media. Mr. Thompson told us in his calm but strategic voice, "Let them talk as much as they want, Mrs. Henderson. The more they talk, the more mistakes they will make and the more inconsistencies will appear. We will speak only once, and that will be in the courtroom where truth matters more than performances." His wisdom gave me strength, though the constant worry still gnawed at me every single day and night. Every evening I sat in the living room watching Emma and Marcus sleep peacefully in their beds, and I would ask myself the same terrifying question. What if we lose? What if the court takes Marcus away? How will I ever forgive myself? How will Sarah survive losing her son? The weight of responsibility felt crushing, but I pushed those dark thoughts away and focused on preparing the strongest possible case. The night before the trial, Sarah and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The yellow light from the overhead bulb illuminated her face, making her look simultaneously strong and heartbreakingly fragile. "Mom," she said in a trembling voice filled with fear, "what if we lose this battle? What if they take Marcus away from us?" Her question cut straight through to my soul, but I reached across the table and took both her hands in mine, squeezing tightly. "The truth is right here," I said firmly, pointing to the thick stack of documents and evidence sitting on the table between us. And the truth never loses in the end, Sarah. Justice may be slow, but it always arrives. I tried to smile reassuringly to give her strength, but inside I could only pray with every fiber of my being. I prayed for justice, for protection, for my grandchildren, and for Sarah, who had already suffered far more than any person should have to endure. The day of the trial finally arrived. The city family court building loomed before us like a mountain we had to climb. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and heavy with tension and anticipation. Journalists lined one side with cameras and recording devices ready, eager to turn our painful family story into sensational headlines and entertainment. On the other side sat neighbors from our town, some who had once been friendly but now turned their backs on us, whispering and pointing with judgment in their eyes. Sarah, Mr. Thompson, and I sat in the front row of the courtroom. Sarah's hand gripped mine so tightly her knuckles turned white, her fingers ice cold, desperately seeking comfort and strength from my presence. I gently stroked her hand with my thumb, trying to transmit calmness and confidence, though inside I was fighting to control my own terror and anxiety. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the Blackwood family sat with rigid straight backs like royalty reviewing peasants. Marcus wore his most expensive designer suit, but his face looked pale and drawn, his eyes hollow and empty as if he were trying desperately to hide mounting anxiety beneath a mask of confidence. Patricia wore large dark sunglasses indoors, looking more like a celebrity hiding from paparazzi than a grandmother at a custody hearing. Richard maintained his characteristic iron expression, sitting like a military commander who had never experienced defeat and refused to contemplate the possibility. Looking at them sitting there so smugly confident, I felt ice-cold rage flow through my veins, but I reminded myself firmly to stay calm and composed. This was not just a battle for custody of Marcus. This was a battle for my family's honor, for everything we had survived and overcome, for the right to protect children who were loved and cherished. The Blackwood family lawyer stood up to deliver his opening statement. He was a young polished man in an immaculate suit who spoke with theatrical eloquence, as if performing for a packed audience rather than presenting a legal case. He talked passionately about the sacred bond between father and son that had been tragically severed through no fault of his clients. He spoke of the profound pain and suffering of loving grandparents who had been cruelly denied access to their precious grandson. With a flourish, he presented receipts for expensive designer toys and high-end children's clothing that the Blackwoods had purchased recently, holding them up as supposed proof of their deep affection and commitment. I stared at those receipts and felt my stomach turn with disgust. Those purchases were not acts of love. They were props in an elaborate performance, evidence manufactured specifically for this courtroom drama to make them appear caring when they had shown nothing but cruelty. Then the Blackwood lawyer called his first witness, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw who walked to the stand. It was the president of my book club, the woman who had smiled warmly at me for years, who had invited me into her home for tea and friendship. Now she avoided my gaze entirely as she took her oath. She testified in a flat rehearsed voice clearly coached by lawyers. Mrs. Henderson and her daughter seemed to be living considerably better lately than before. I have heard rumors they received significant money from somewhere unknown. Her calculated words were designed to plant seeds of suspicion, implying without directly stating that we were using Marcus as leverage for financial gain from the wealthy Blackwood family. The courtroom immediately erupted in whispers and murmurs. I felt dozens of eyes on me, judging, condemning, as if I were a greedy, manipulative woman rather than a grandmother protecting her family. Sarah squeezed my hand even tighter, and I knew she was barely holding back tears of humiliation and anger. When it was finally our turn to present our side, Mr. Thompson stood slowly and deliberately, projecting calm authority and confidence. He called me as the first witness for our defense. I stood on trembling legs but with a heart full of determination and truth. As I walked to the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible to swear my oath, I looked out across the courtroom and felt as if my entire life and character were being put on trial and judged. The Blackwood lawyer approached me with a mocking, condescending smile on his face. He asked in a voice dripping with false politeness and accusation, "Mrs. Henderson, Is it not true that you held onto the boy and hid his existence specifically hoping to receive financial benefits from my wealthy client's family? The courtroom erupted in whispers again, and the sound felt like hundreds of needles pricking every inch of my skin. I took a slow, deep breath, looked that smug lawyer directly in his cold eyes, then turned to face Marcus Blackwood himself. In a low but absolutely firm voice that carried clearly through the silent courtroom, I said, "Benefits? The only thing I have done is care for and protect what your client cruelly abandoned without a second thought." I began to speak, and every single word came from the deepest parts of my soul, from years of pain and love and sacrifice. I told them about that terrible rainy night 3 years ago when I found my pregnant daughter on her knees in front of the locked Blackwood mansion gates. I described in vivid detail how her belly was swollen with their grandchildren, how the rain had soaked her completely, how her suitcase had been thrown onto the wet ground with baby clothes scattered in muddy puddles and trampled. I recounted seeing Marcus's silhouette standing in the second-floor window, watching his pregnant wife suffer in the rain, and then deliberately closing the curtain and walking away without coming to help her or show even basic human compassion. I spoke about the days and weeks and months that followed, when Sarah and I faced absolutely everything alone, when we had no money, no support, no help whatsoever from the Blackwood family who had thrown us away like garbage. Complete silence filled the courtroom as I spoke. Only my voice could be heard, slow and measured but absolutely full of power and conviction and undeniable truth. I saw some people in the audience lower their heads in shame. Others openly wiped away tears. I was not speaking to gain sympathy or pity. I was speaking so the truth would finally be heard clearly and completely after being buried under mountains of lies. Mr. Thompson stood and began systematically presenting our evidence. The large screen in the courtroom lit up brightly. First, he displayed and read aloud the specific clause from the divorce decree where Marcus Blackwood had signed his full legal name, explicitly and voluntarily waiving all parental rights and responsibilities for the unborn child Sarah was carrying at the time of their divorce. The judge, a stern middle-aged woman with an expression of absolute fairness and no-nonsense authority, looked directly at Marcus and asked him to confirm whether that was indeed his signature on the legal document. He mumbled barely audibly, his face turning even more pale. "Yes, that is my signature." The courtroom immediately gasped collectively, and I saw his face drain of all remaining color as the reality of his own documented abandonment was displayed for everyone to witness. Then Mr. Thompson presented the original handwritten letter that Marcus had thrown at Sarah along with that check, projecting the image onto the large screen for the entire courtroom to read. The sentence written in Marcus's own handwriting, "I want nothing to do with you or that worthless baby. You are both dead to me," appeared in stark black letters like an accusation that could not be denied or explained away. A wave of shocked murmurs and gasps swept through the courtroom like wildfire. Journalists frantically scribbled notes and took photographs. I looked directly at Marcus and saw his head bow down. His hands clenched white-knuckled on the arms of his chair, unable to face the evidence of his own cruelty. Patricia removed her dark sunglasses, revealing eyes filled with panic and barely contained hysteria. Richard remained rigid and motionless, as if clinging desperately to the last shreds of family pride and dignity. Finally, Mr. Thompson opened our thick folder of financial records and receipts. He methodically pointed out document after document proving that Sarah and I had paid for every single expense related to raising both children for 3 full years. Every container of baby formula, every package of diapers, every doctor visit, every medication, every piece of clothing, every meal. Not one penny had come from the Blackwood family during those 3 years. His voice became increasingly firm and powerful as he addressed the court. "They did not simply neglect their responsibilities, Your Honor. They actively and deliberately denied these children existed. They paid a small settlement to Sarah during the divorce specifically to make the matter disappear quietly, to buy their way out of shame and responsibility." His words fell like hammer blows, leaving the Blackwood family lawyer speechless and scrambling desperately for any defense. The lawyer tried to mount some kind of counterargument, searching frantically for convoluted legal technicalities and loopholes, but everything was utterly useless against such clear and overwhelming evidence of abandonment and cruelty. The truth was laid bare before the entire courtroom, impossible to deny or spin or manipulate. The judge looked directly at the Blackwood family with an expression of stern disapproval and disappointment. "This case is not simply about biological paternity," she said in a voice that resonated powerfully through the silent courtroom. "This case is fundamentally about honor, responsibility, commitment, and what it truly means to be a parent. The evidence presented here makes it abundantly and painfully clear that you willingly and deliberately abandoned these children 3 years ago based solely on gender prejudice and selfish priorities." She lifted her gavel high and brought it down hard on the desk with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire building. "The court categorically denies Mr. Marcus Blackwood's petition for custody. Full legal custody of the minor children, Marcus Henderson and Emma Henderson, is awarded exclusively and permanently to their mother, Mrs. Sarah Henderson, and their maternal grandmother, Mrs. Elizabeth Henderson. Furthermore, the court finds no basis whatsoever for visitation rights given the documented history of abandonment and the potential emotional harm to the children." I felt as if the entire world stopped spinning for one perfect moment. Sarah grabbed me and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking with overwhelming relief and release. I hugged her back fiercely, feeling warmth and victory and vindication flowing through both of us like electricity. Mr. Thompson placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, smiled with genuine pride and satisfaction, and whispered quietly, "We did it, Mrs. Henderson. Justice has been served." I looked over toward the Blackwood side of the courtroom. Richard and Patricia sat with their heads bowed low, their faces masks of shock and humiliation and defeat. Marcus remained completely motionless, frozen like a statue, his face pale as death itself. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction or pleasure in their suffering. Instead, I felt only deep, profound sadness. They had lost everything through their own selfishness, cruelty, and obsession with status and legacy. The price of their lies and prejudice was something they would carry like chains for the rest of their lives. When the courtroom doors finally opened and we walked out into the hallway, we were immediately swarmed by crowds of journalists with microphones thrust toward us and camera flashes going off like lightning. This time, however, their expressions were not judgmental or accusatory. Instead, I saw sympathy, understanding, even admiration in many faces, as if they finally understood the truth of our painful story. Mr. Thompson, ever calm and professional, stepped forward and raised his hand to quiet the crowd. He said only one simple sentence in a firm, authoritative voice. "Justice has been served today. Nothing more needs to be said." I looked at him with a heart overflowing with gratitude. Those few words, though simple, felt like cool, fresh wind lifting away the crushing weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for so long. On the other side of the building, the Blackwood family was not granted such peaceful exit. They were immediately surrounded and trapped by aggressive reporters, camera flashes exploding non-stop like fireworks, shouted questions filling the air like attacks. Marcus, his face ashen and hollow, tried desperately to push through the crowd while bodyguards struggled to clear a path. Richard and Patricia needed multiple security guards to escort them to their vehicle. I watched them retreat with their heads down and shoulders hunched in defeat and shame, and again I felt no pleasure or triumph, only that same deep sadness. They had dug their own graves with lies and cruelty and prejudice. Now they had to live in those graves they had created, and no amount of money or status or power could save them from the consequences of their choices. The very next morning, I woke early and made myself a cup of chamomile tea, then nervously opened the region's largest newspaper. The headline jumped out at me immediately. "Truth revealed in Blackwood custody case. Family denied rights after gender discrimination and abandonment." The article was detailed and thorough, describing the entire court hearing from the irrefutable evidence we presented to the complete inadequacy of the Blackwood family legal defense. The journalist revealed the real story for the first time. The night Sarah was cruelly thrown out of the mansion while pregnant. The handwritten letter filled with venom and rejection from Marcus. The truth that the Blackwood family had never shown any interest whatsoever in Emma simply because she was female, caring only about obtaining the male heir they believed belonged to them by right. I read the article with trembling hands, not from anger anymore but because truth had finally been acknowledged publicly and our family honor had been restored. Our reputation that they had tried so viciously to destroy was now vindicated and cleared. The community would finally know we were not greedy villains but victims who had fought back and won. The consequences for the Blackwood family came faster and harder than I could have imagined. Within days, a major international construction partner announced publicly they were canceling their multi-million-dollar contract with Blackwood Real Estate with a clear stated reason. We do not do business with companies whose leadership demonstrates such profound lack of ethics and basic human decency. Their company stock prices immediately plummeted, dropping nearly 40% in value within 1 week. Other investors and business partners quickly began withdrawing their money and severing ties, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Richard, who had been so proud of his position and power and reputation, was forced by the board of directors to resign as chairman in disgrace, a devastating blow to his massive ego and sense of identity. Patricia, who had lived her entire adult life for appearances and social status, became seriously ill from the stress and shame. She stopped attending all social functions and refused to leave her house, cutting off contact with her entire social circle, as if trying to hide from the judging eyes and whispered conversations that followed her everywhere. I felt no pity for them, but I also felt no joy or satisfaction in their downfall. They had reaped exactly what they had sown, facing natural consequences of their own terrible choices and actions. I simply wished they would leave my family in peace permanently and never darken our doorway again. Marcus, however, instead of learning from his mistakes and showing genuine repentance, became increasingly resentful and bitter. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that he felt publicly humiliated and stripped of everything he valued, unable to accept responsibility for his own actions and choices. For someone like him who had always gotten everything he wanted, failure and rejection were unbearable experiences. Several months later, high society social circles were buzzing with shocking news. Businessman Marcus Blackwood is engaged to Miss Victoria Ashford, only daughter of the president of National Commerce Bank. Their wedding was absolutely lavish and extravagant, reportedly 10 times more expensive and elaborate than his wedding to Sarah had been. Newspaper photographs showed an impeccably dressed Marcus standing beside a stunning bride in an elaborate designer gown, surrounded by flowers and lights in a garden that looked like something from a fantasy movie. People said he was desperately trying to rebuild his image and reputation, to prove to the world he was still successful and desirable, that he could have something better and more impressive than what he had lost. But looking carefully at his eyes in those glossy wedding photos, I saw an unmistakable emptiness and sadness that no amount of money or beauty or status could hide or fill. Meanwhile, our life slowly and gradually returned to a new version of normal, though it was different from anything we had known before. One morning Mrs. Carroll, the kind neighbor who had warned me about suspicious men watching our house, knocked on my door carrying a plate of fresh homemade banana bread still warm from the oven. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to apologize to you," she said with genuine guilt and remorse in her eyes. "I believed those terrible lies in the newspapers before the trial. I was wrong about you and your family. I'm so sorry." I smiled warmly, accepted the plate gratefully, and invited her inside for tea and conversation. The women from my book club also slowly started reaching out and contacting me again, sending apologetic messages and invitations to meetings. One member, Mrs. Rosa, even sent me a handwritten letter telling me she was deeply ashamed for having doubted me and for believing the Blackwood lies without question. I read her letter with mixed feelings of relief and lingering sadness. My family's honor and reputation had been publicly restored and vindicated, but the emotional scars from those days of judgment and isolation were still there, hidden beneath the surface, dormant but not forgotten in my aching heart. Sarah changed dramatically during this entire ordeal. She no longer cried herself to sleep. She no longer carried that heavy burden of shame and failure. One quiet afternoon while I was folding Emma and Marcus's clean laundry, she came into the room carrying a newspaper featuring Marcus's lavish society wedding to Victoria Ashford on the front page. I waited tensely for her reaction, expecting tears or bitter words or renewed pain. But Sarah simply looked at the photo calmly for a long moment, then quietly folded the newspaper and placed it on the table without any visible emotion. "It does not matter to me anymore, Mom," she said in a calm but absolutely firm voice. "He can live whatever life he chooses to live. He can marry whoever he wants. But I have Emma and Marcus, and they are everything I need. That is enough for me." I looked at my daughter and saw that inner strength and peace had completely replaced the pain and trauma of the past. I felt overwhelming pride swelling in my chest, knowing she had not only survived but had genuinely healed and grown stronger. That evening, as I sat reading a bedtime story to Emma and Marcus, both of them cuddled close on either side of me, I glanced at the newspaper still sitting on the kitchen table. The wedding photo of Marcus and Victoria Ashford gleamed under the lamplight, showing wealth and elegance and perfection. But I just smiled quietly to myself, thinking about a simple truth I had learned over many years. A person who desperately tries to prove they are happy to the outside world is usually the emptiest and most miserable inside. I did not think this to mock Marcus or take pleasure in his suffering, but because it was simply truth. Real genuine happiness is not found in what you display to the world, in expensive weddings or designer clothes or impressive houses. True happiness lives in quiet moments exactly like this one, sitting here listening to my grandchildren's innocent laughter, feeling the warmth of family love surrounding me like a protective blanket. 3 more years passed peacefully. Our lives found a steady, comfortable rhythm, though the journey was not always easy. Sarah got a part-time job as an accountant at a small independent bookstore in the center of town. The pay was modest, barely above minimum wage, but it gave her financial independence and most importantly helped her rebuild the confidence and self-worth that the Blackwoods had tried so hard to destroy. I saw how her eyes lit up with genuine joy every time she talked about new book arrivals, or when she helped an elderly customer find the perfect novel for their grandchild. Those small moments of connection and purpose gave me deep peace, as if I was watching my daughter's wounded soul slowly heal and bloom again like a flower after a long, harsh winter. Marcus and Emma were now 9 years old and thriving in elementary school. Marcus was an energetic, restless boy, always running around the house or yard with his worn soccer ball clutched tightly as if it were his most precious treasure. He could spend entire days playing outside with neighborhood children, coming home exhausted and covered in sweat but grinning from ear to ear with pure childhood happiness. Emma, in beautiful contrast, was quieter and more introspective. She loved to sit by the living room window with her art supplies spread around her, drawing elaborate pictures for hours. Her drawings full of colorful flowers and smiling families filled my heart with indescribable warmth and joy. Those 2 precious children were the light and purpose of this house. Every night when they climbed into my lap to hear a story or laugh together at some silly joke, I felt deep in my bones that everything we had endured and fought for had been absolutely worth it. Sometimes I still heard occasional rumors and updates about the Blackwood family through the neighborhood gossip network. Their company had managed to climb out of immediate financial crisis thanks to massive support and capital injection from the Ashford banking family, but they never regained the pristine reputation and unchallenged dominance they had once enjoyed. Richard was now just a hollow shadow of his former powerful self, rarely appearing at business or social events anymore. Patricia, who had lived entirely for appearances and social status, had practically vanished from high society gatherings and charity functions completely. I did not spend much time or energy thinking about them anymore, but those occasional stories reached me like quiet reminders that justice, though sometimes slow and winding, always eventually finds its way to truth. One cool autumn evening, with the air carrying that distinctive smell of fallen leaves and coming winter, I was clearing dishes from the dinner table. Sarah sat nearby helping Emma and Marcus with homework, smiling encouragingly every time Marcus showed her a math problem the teacher had praised. The house was peaceful and warm, filled only with the quiet rustling of notebook pages and the children's soft voices. Then suddenly the doorbell rang. 2 sharp knocks that seemed to cut through the comfortable silence like a knife blade. My heart immediately leaped in my chest as memories of previous confrontations with the Blackwoods came flooding back unwanted. Sarah looked up quickly, a flicker of concern and old fear crossing her face. I took a deep, steadying breath, wiped my hands on my kitchen towel, and walked to the door. Under the yellowish glow of the porch light, I saw Marcus Blackwood standing alone. He was no longer the same confident man I remembered from 3 years ago. Gone were the expensive tailored suits and arrogant posture. He wore a worn, shabby coat that had seen better days. He looked painfully thin, almost gaunt, with an unkempt beard and deep dark circles under his hollow eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights and inner torment. He stood hunched over on my doorstep like a man completely defeated by life itself. He began in a hoarse, broken voice, staring down at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. I am not here to demand anything or claim the children. I just need to apologize. I just need you to know how sorry I am. I stood silently in the doorway without inviting him inside. I wanted to hear what he had come to say, but there was absolutely no space left for trust or sympathy in my heart after everything he had done to my family. He took a shaky breath and began speaking. His voice choked and struggling as if each word required enormous effort to force out. He talked about his marriage to Victoria Ashford, describing it as primarily an economic contract and business arrangement rather than a genuine love story. She is beautiful and accomplished, he said with a bitter, twisted smile, but she is cold and controlling. She wants to dominate every aspect of our lives. She is constantly jealous and suspicious of my past. She says repeatedly that I am a failure and a disgrace because I could not keep my own children. She throws that in my face constantly. He explained that they had tried every possible fertility treatment, consulting with specialists both domestically and internationally, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, but after 3 years of marriage they still had no children. The doctors determined the problem was with Victoria's reproductive system. He continued, his voice breaking, but the Blackwood family cannot dare confront her or her family about it because our entire company now depends completely on loans and support from her father's banking empire. He described their enormous luxurious mansion as feeling like a cold, empty tomb, completely devoid of warmth or laughter or any sign of real life or love. Every single night, he said, his voice cracking with emotion and his hands trembling, I lie awake in that empty bedroom and I hear children laughing in my mind. I imagine Marcus and Emma. I imagine them saying Daddy for the first time, taking their first steps, running to hug me. I destroyed all of that with my own stupidity and cruelty. I threw away everything that mattered. He finally looked up with desperate, pleading eyes, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks, cutting tracks through days of accumulated exhaustion and regret. I had absolutely everything in my hands, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A loving wife, beautiful children, a real family. And I lost it all because of my own selfishness and my family's twisted obsession with status and legacy. I do not expect or deserve to be forgiven, Mrs. Henderson. I just need to see them from a distance. Just one time, please. His words sounded like a desperate prayer from a broken man, but I felt no compassion or sympathy rising in my heart. Not because I actively hated him, but because I understood clearly that forgiveness was not mine to give. That decision belonged to Sarah alone. I turned back toward the house and called out gently, Sarah, sweetheart, please come here for a moment. Sarah emerged from the kitchen still holding Emma's small hand. Emma looked at Marcus with innocent curiosity but no recognition whatsoever. Her calmness somehow more devastating than any angry words could have been. Marcus stared at Sarah like a condemned prisoner standing before his final judge. His head bowed low, his entire body radiating shame and regret. Sarah, he whispered hoarsely, but she raised her hand and stopped him before he could continue. Sarah looked at him steadily for a very long moment, her face composed and peaceful, before finally speaking in a calm, measured voice. I forgave you a long time ago, Marcus. I had to forgive you for my own peace and healing. He raised his head sharply, a sudden flash of desperate hope igniting in his dead eyes, but Sarah continued in that same steady, emotionless tone. But I forgave you for myself, not for you. I forgave you so I could move forward with my life without carrying hatred and bitterness. Not so you could come back into our lives or become part of my children's world. That door is permanently closed. Her words were like a clean surgical cut, completely without anger or resentment or any emotional attachment, Just simple unvarnished truth spoken with absolute clarity and finality. Then she took a deliberate step backward, positioned herself beside me, and wrapped her arm protectively around Emma's small shoulders. "Go now," Sarah said firmly, her voice not wavering even slightly, "and do not come back here again." Marcus stood frozen as if desperately wanting to say something more, to plead or explain or bargain, but Sarah's steady unwavering gaze made it abundantly clear there was absolutely nothing left to say. He finally turned slowly and walked away under the dim flickering streetlight, his thin hunched figure gradually disappearing into the darkness like a ghost fading into nothing. After that devastating night, Marcus Blackwood never knocked on my door or attempted to contact us again directly. But something unexpected began happening. On random weekend afternoons, I would occasionally notice his old sedan parked at the very end of our street, far enough away to not be intrusive but close enough to see our house. He never approached. He never knocked. He never asked for anything. He would simply appear near the wooden fence surrounding our small front yard, quietly leaving carefully wrapped gifts. Remote control car. A large set of colored markers. A box of the expensive cookies that Emma and Marcus particularly loved. These gifts always arrived wrapped in bright cheerful paper, accompanied by small notes written in Marcus Blackwood's distinctively shaky handwriting. For the children, the notes would always say simply, "With love." Emma and Marcus, possessing all the innocent trusting nature of young children, would always run excitedly to the fence when they saw the gifts appear. "Oh look, the kind uncle brought us presents again," Marcus would shout enthusiastically, hugging the new toy car tightly against his chest, his dark eyes shining with uncomplicated joy and pure happiness. Emma would clutch a new box of colored pencils or art supplies, murmuring a soft shy thank you before turning to me excitedly. "Grandma, my teacher said today that I draw better than anyone in the whole class. Maybe these new colors will help me draw even more beautiful pictures." Marcus Blackwood would just stand there at a respectful distance, watching them with a sad, broken smile, his eyes perpetually moist with unshed tears. Once I witnessed him bend down quickly to embrace both children for just a few brief seconds, his arms wrapping around them desperately as if trying to memorize the feeling. Then he abruptly straightened up and walked away without looking back even once, his shoulders shaking slightly as he disappeared down the street. Sarah and I watched these encounters from our living room window without saying a single word to each other. There was no anger anymore. No satisfaction in his obvious suffering. Just a quiet, sad acceptance of reality and consequences. The children had no idea this kind uncle was actually their biological father. And perhaps that was better for everyone involved. They knew only love and stability and security, untainted by the complicated, painful history that had brought them into this world. On the anniversary of my late husband's death, as we did faithfully every single year, Sarah and I took Emma and Marcus to visit his grave at the peaceful cemetery on the outskirts of town. Tall eucalyptus trees lined the pathways, their leaves whispering softly in the gentle breeze. I carefully cleaned my husband's headstone, removing fallen leaves and dirt, then placed a fresh bouquet of bright yellow chrysanthemums on the grave, his favorite flowers that always reminded me of sunshine and happier days. Emma and Marcus played nearby among the headstones, their pure innocent laughter echoing through the quiet sacred space, a beautiful reminder that life continues and joy persists even in places of death and memory. I sat down on the grass beside the grave and whispered softly to my husband as if he could still hear me. "You see, my love, we're doing okay. We survived everything they threw at us. Sarah is so much stronger than either of us ever imagined she could be, and the grandchildren are our greatest blessing and joy." Sarah sat down beside me and rested her head gently on my shoulder without speaking, and I felt the comforting warmth of her body against mine. For a long, peaceful moment, a sense of deep contentment enveloped both of us like a warm blanket. Then Sarah spoke quietly, her voice as soft as the wind rustling through the eucalyptus leaves. "Mom, I do not hate Marcus anymore. I truly do not. I just feel relieved and free. Seeing him suffering like that does not make me happy or give me any satisfaction at all." Her profound words left me momentarily speechless. I stroked her hair tenderly and smiled with pride and love. You have learned a lesson that many adults never understand in their entire lives, Sarah. Sometimes the real victory is not about defeating your enemy or watching them suffer. The real victory is finding genuine peace within yourself and letting go of bitterness. Sarah nodded slowly, and I saw a new deeper light in her eyes, as if she had finally released an invisible crushing weight she had been carrying for far too long. When we returned home later that afternoon, the sunset was painting our small neighborhood street in beautiful shades of gold and orange, with houses tucked peacefully among the old trees. I was unlocking our front door when I noticed Marcus Blackwood standing there again in front of the fence. This time he had not brought any gifts or packages. He was simply standing motionless like a lonely shadow, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn coat, staring at our house with an expression of infinite sadness and loss. His face looked even more gaunt and exhausted than the last time I had seen him up close, with deeper, darker circles under his eyes and a defeated posture that made him look far older than his actual years. He looked at me across the distance, and in his hollow eyes there was no longer any pleading or hope, only the profound weariness of someone who has lost absolutely everything that ever mattered. Marcus and Emma saw him standing there and immediately ran toward him with happy, excited voices. "Kind uncle," Marcus shouted joyfully, pulling eagerly on his coat sleeve. "Uncle, today we went to visit Grandpa. Grandpa is buried on the hill where there are so many beautiful tall trees." Emma chimed in with her sweet, gentle voice, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "I made a special drawing for Grandpa showing him in heaven with angels. Do you want to see it, Uncle?" Marcus Blackwood bent down slowly to their level, his trembling hands reaching out to stroke their soft hair with infinite tenderness and heartbreaking gentleness. Then young Marcus, with the innocent curiosity that only children possess, asked a question that pierced through all pretense. "Uncle, do you have a daddy? Does your daddy love you very much like our grandma loves us?" The child's innocent, simple question struck like a blade straight through Marcus Blackwood's heart. He froze completely, unable to formulate any response. He just lowered his head and gently squeezed both children's hair with shaking hands, as if desperately trying to hold on to that fleeting moment for just a few seconds longer, to memorize the feeling of touching his own children. Sarah stood in our doorway watching the scene unfold with a calm expression. In her eyes there was no storm of emotion, no pain, no resentment, no hatred. Just quiet, neutral observation. I stood beside my daughter, feeling the incredible strength and maturity that radiated from her presence. Marcus Blackwood slowly looked up, his gaze moving from the children to Sarah, then finally to me. His eyes seemed to be desperately trying to communicate something, to convey regret or sorrow or love or loss, but no words came out of his mouth. He simply could not speak. Finally, he turned and began walking away, his thin, defeated silhouette gradually disappearing into the beautiful colors of the sunset, becoming smaller and smaller until he vanished completely. Emma and Marcus ran back into the house, still laughing and chattering excitedly about their day, talking non-stop about the cemetery visit and the kind uncle, as if his appearance had been just another ordinary fleeting moment in their happy, innocent lives. I looked up at the clear, darkening sky where a few birds were returning to their nests for the evening. I felt a strange, profound peace settling over my heart, as if the entire terrible storm of the past years was finally completely behind us, leaving only this soft, gentle silence and acceptance. I did not know what the future would bring. Would Marcus Blackwood continue appearing on weekends, watching his children from that painful distance? Would Emma and young Marcus eventually discover the truth about their biological father? I honestly did not know the answers to those questions. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. We had survived the worst storm imaginable and found our own safe harbor in the aftermath. We had created a home filled with genuine love and security. I walked into our house and saw Sarah laughing and playing with both children on the living room floor, and their joyful voices filled every corner of the space with warmth and light. I smiled deeply and sat down to join them, and in my heart I gave profound thanks that my family was still together and whole, no matter how the outside world continued to change and shift around us. After everything we had endured and overcome, I finally understood some fundamental truths about life. Life is never easy or simple for those who choose to walk the right path and stand up for justice. But it is precisely through pain and struggle that we learn what it truly means to be strong and resilient. I understood that genuine love does not come from wealth or prestige or impressive family names. Real love comes from silent daily sacrifice and from the heart that protects what is right and just, regardless of cost. True happiness is not found in mansions or expensive cars or lavish weddings. Happiness lives in the innocent smiles of children who grow up surrounded by unconditional love and security. Forgiveness is not weakness or surrender. Forgiveness is liberating yourself from the heavy chains of hatred and bitterness that only poison your own soul. I did not win our battle with money or power or social status. I won with unwavering faith that truth, no matter how long it takes, always eventually comes to light. And perhaps the most valuable lesson I learned through this entire ordeal was this profound truth. When a mother or a grandmother stands up with absolute determination to protect her family, no power in the world, no amount of money or influence or manipulation, can ever bring her down or make her surrender. The story you have heard had names and specific places changed to protect the privacy and identity of the real people involved in these events. I do not tell this story to judge anyone or to seek revenge or sympathy. I tell it in the sincere hope that someone listening might hear it and truly reflect on its meaning. How many mothers and grandmothers are suffering in silence right now within their own homes and families? How many are being told they are worthless because of circumstances beyond their control? I genuinely wonder, if you found yourself in my exact situation, what would you do? Would you remain silent and accepting to keep false peace? Or would you stand up and face everything, no matter how frightening, to reclaim your voice and protect those you love? I truly want to know your honest opinion, because every story we share can become a guiding light on someone else's dark, difficult path. I believe with all my heart that God always blesses those who stand for truth and justice. And I firmly believe that courage and love will always lead us toward better, brighter days, no matter how dark the night may seem. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find strength in your own struggles, and may you always have the courage to protect what truly matters.